Hello, welcome. This is Jon Kofas. The analysis and conclusions, opinions in this video are solely mine and not necessarily shared by this channel. 2026 it marks the 250th anniversary of American independence, and the United States government is gearing up to celebrate in its own unique way under a Trump administration that has formed a committee made up primarily of loyalists, billionaires, and multimillionaires to celebrate this very important occasion. The manner that a government celebrates its independence uh, anniversary, whether it's the 100th or the 50th, or it doesn't matter what it is very significant as it manifests far more of that government's, the nature of that government's regime and its policies and where it wants society to be headed than it does about the history, which is usually very complex and multi-layered, of that country, whether it be the United States, Russia, or any other country. It is no different for the United States. Clearly, the Trump administration and the Republican Party and the multimillionaires and billionaires and the institutions supporting this government are all lined up to project a vision behind a president that essentially is engaged in a campaign in the last year and a half or so to marginalize one of the most important minority populations in the United States, namely the Latino population, which is 19% of the American demographics. This is the population, of course, that is obviously the United States claims only illegal immigrants, but of course, the record shows that illegals have also been swept up. Legal citizens and legal aliens have also been swept up in this endeavor. The theme of the United States government is freedom for the 250th anniversary. And freedom is a term that may have many meanings, including freedom to be a consumer, to choose any kind of consumption products you want to buy, freedom to elect a pre-selected official, whether that official is running for office at the local level, state level, or federal level. The freedom is not a concept that freedom could mean freedom to worship, which is true. Freedom, however, this does not account for social justice. It does not account for peace. It does not account for equality. It does not account for universal human rights. So freedom, as great as it sounds, is confined to the elites within the social ladder. And so this is the theme that is celebrated by the 250th anniversary committee that the president has chosen. A committee, by the way, that is also using this event for fundraising. A number of mainstream media outlets, from the New York Times to Washington Post, others, USA Today, and so forth, have raised questions about the manner that this committee has been used for this august celebration. This is a very important celebration, 250 years, to basically commercialize the event and to use it to raise money for political slash commercial purposes. The theme is not the interestingly enough, it is not social justice, it is not inclusiveness, it is not a celebration of the diversity of American society, which includes everyone. Let's not forget the very first people who were already there, the Native Americans, to the Africans who were brought to the Western Hemisphere against their will as slaves, to workers who came from every corner of the earth, from Asia to Eastern Europe, and of course, Latin America. This is not that sort of celebration. It is not a diversity, multicultural oriented celebration. It is a celebration for freedom, but freedom itself has a specific meaning, and freedom is invariably linked in a capitalist political economy to social class. The higher the social class, the greater the freedom. Now, the United States government under Trump, in celebrating this event, is essentially using it to project an image of a government that is gearing the country in a certain direction. It is no secret that the government has invoked the unitary executive theory, which essentially reduces the American government of separation of powers, basically the legislative, the executive, the judicial branch, into a government where the executive branch has much more authority and overrides the authority of the other two branches, therefore sinking to the level of an authoritarian regime. And it is no secret that many analysts, everyone from scholars to journalists to politicians, have used the term authoritarianism to describe the United States. And let me point out that in public opinion polls, many Americans, whether they support, by the way, and there's a percentage of them that actually support authoritarianism, whether they support it or they oppose it, they do believe that at the very least, the United States has been slipping toward authoritarianism. So this is not a celebration. Interestingly enough, this committee is not celebrating democracy in America. It's not celebrating the spirit of a democratic society or the American dream, which basically, and I'll discuss this in the longer video, this is just a teaser video, an introduction. The American dream, of course, interestingly enough, the phrase was coined during the Great Depression, not surprising. And of course, in public opinion polls today, no one would be surprised to find out that a very small percentage believe not only that it exists for them, but that it ever existed for the majority of the American people. That in fact, it was always a dream. And actualizing the dream, making it a reality of living in a pluralistic society, an open society of freedom, with the pursuit of greater socioeconomic equality and material comforts that it promised, was just a dream. Because the statistics of the United States, especially in the last 50 years, indicate downward social mobility. The American dream necessarily implies the opposite, upward social mobility, not downward. Then there is the domain of foreign policy, namely, why not have, as part of this celebration, the 250th celebration, the term peace included, peace. The reason, of course, is partly because the United States history from its origin until today has been a history of intermittent military adventures. And in the last 40 years, especially, and you can go back to Vietnam or you can go back to Korea in the early 50s, and you can see that the United States has engaged in military campaigns. And in fact, public opinion polls indicate that the vast majority of the American people believe that their country interferes in the internal affairs of other governments. This is not China saying it. These are American citizens in public opinion polls telling that, yes, the United States government interferes in the internal affairs of other countries. In foreign policy, of course, there is the doctrine that has been consolidated and solidified these days in the early 21st century, and that is the forever war doctrine. The question is, was that part of the social contract? Was that what the founding fathers envisioned? Forever war? Is that what they envisioned? Right now, during the Trump administration, this is late April 2026, there are two wars. One, it was a war of choice that the Trump administration, as many Democratic senators and congressmen point out, and analysts right and left, and governments all over the world, members of the UN Security Council and the General Assembly point out as well, a war of choice against Iran, in which the United States engaged, of course, starts February 28th, 2026, and with its partner in the Middle East, Israel, in order to deprive Iran of nuclear weapons it doesn't have, or rather preemptively to strike them before they acquire them. Never mind that Israel has between 60 and somewhere in the 400s, and it is the only country that has nuclear weapons, has them right now, by the way. And there's silence about that. And never mind that Iran was willing, in from 2015 onwards, to negotiate getting out of developing nuclear weapons. But the US and Israel, of course, are the ones who managed to obstruct that and pursue a policy of destabilization. So part of the American independence celebration and the 250 years is also militarism as a way of life. President Jimmy Carter, after he was out of office, acknowledged as much, that there have been very few times the US was not in some manner directly or indirectly, covertly or overtly engaged in militarism abroad, given the United States has military operations, including military bases, in most countries in the world. There are about 195 countries or so. The US has a presence in about 175 of those. I think it's 175, 174 countries. So the United States has and of course, given the defense budget, it speaks for itself what the US spends versus not just Russia and China, but the entire world. When you look at the US defense budget and match it against the entire world, the US spends roughly a third, actually a bit more than a third, and proposes to spend well above that with 1.5 trillion in the next fiscal year. I invite you to join me for the longer video. This is a very complex topic. And a topic that, of course, a country celebration, its Independence Day, can celebrate many things. It can celebrate its creative people throughout its history, people who contributed to the sciences, to the arts, people who contributed to writing, fiction and nonfiction alike. It can celebrate its architects and engineers. There's a lot to celebrate. However, the focus, as I said, is chosen by the government itself, and the government has chosen a theme for the celebration. It is a theme to promote neoliberal political economy, namely Wall Street interests, large donors linked to the White House and to the GOP. And there is very little mention of the rest of the country, except for one issue. When you go to the webpage of the White House, you'll be struck to see that they ask the rest of the country to support what their theme is, although it doesn't include the rest of the population. It doesn't talk about social justice. It doesn't talk about peace, universal human rights. These are important issues. And by the way, the foundations of these are in the 18th century, because the United States became a country during the Age of Reason, during the Enlightenment of the 18th century, and Thomas Jefferson, among others, were profoundly influenced by the Enlightenment. They too were part of that era. I thank you for listening. I ask you to take a look at the longer video and please join this channel. Thank you very much.